Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello again. Welcome to the Sport Business Podcast. I'm Martin Ross, Editor-in-Chief of Sport Business News. We are back to wade through the depths of the major stories, deals, and trends shaping the sports industry. I'm joined by the returning John Rest, Chief Correspondent, and Maria Kolodova, Senior Reporter of Sport Business Media. And this week, the newsroom will feature Netflix's surprise move into the Mexican sports right landscape. And we'll also have a look at yet more profits and another business vertical for Matchroom Sports, plus some other big topics during what has been a frenetic week for news. And for Inside the Deal, we'll be joined by Matthew Williams. We'll dissect a big old Ford MLB sponsorship and explain why Independence Day will be central to the activation, plus the usual insights and tidbits in any other business. Maria, welcome back to the pod. I am going to hit you with a question straight off the bat, and it's not baseball.
God, okay.
Are you ready?
Yes, hit me.
Okay, so you were very gallantly trying to stir up interest in the office in March Madness, signing everyone up to ESPN's very popular bracket predictor. I want to know, did you succeed? And if you put yourselves in the shoes of the NCAA or even ESPN or DAZN as broadcasters, how tough is it to generate interest this side of the pond for what is a mega event? And just to be clear, I said a mega event and not a MAGA event, although maybe in some states.
Yeah, we did. This is the second year in a row that I've run the bracket pool at Sport Business. For those who might not know, it's basically March Madness, 64 teams, straight knockout tournament in a bracket. And before the tournament starts, you basically predict every single game all the way down to the final, including the winner. And then chaos or madness ensues. And your predictions are basically out of the window by like 2 hours into the tournament. And we got over half the company actually this year participating, which was really fun. I did not win. I did not do well at all, nor did I do well last year. But that's okay. I had fun, and that's what counts. And actually, my colleague Faiz would like me to say that he came third, and he was very, very proud of that fact. So I'm just giving him a shout out here on the podcast. But in terms of interest, actually, I think the biggest hurdle is just making people aware of the fact that A, the tournament is running and kind of vaguely how it works, and B, that this bracket is like a thing that people do. Because actually, it's really easy, and you don't even really need to know anything about basketball or college basketball. You know, there's seeds, so you can kind of see who's better on any kind of platform that houses the bracket prediction thing. It'll give you some sort of background, some sort of stat comparison, a little blurb about each team or the matchup. We did it on ESPN this year at Sport Business, and, they give you a head-to-head, they give you all these things. And, because it is March Madness and because there's all these upsets and all these things that happen in the tournament, even if you do, like, you're the leading expert on college basketball, you'll still not get a perfect bracket.
No.
Because no one's ever gotten a perfect bracket. So, yeah, I think the biggest hurdle is honestly just getting people to know about it.
To know what it is.
After that,
100%. I think it is a very US product. John, tell us how much Masters viewing you got away with on your holiday with the family.
Yeah, it's not a holiday when you got family, Martin. When you got kids, anyway. I watched all of Sunday pretty much, so that was impressive. My concern is whether Sandy got out for a walk this weekend, Martin, because I can imagine you just sat down on the sofa for 4 days, no?
She did. She got a lot of morning walks. Okay. One of my friends took her in the evening, which was brilliant.
No, fascinating. I actually, watched a lot of it on Sunday. I was quite fascinated. I watch not as much golf as you, I have to admit, so I don't always take in what the players are wearing, but I was intrigued by Cam Young's sponsors. We talked about this. You said he's had MLB on his collar of his shirt, hasn't he, for some time? I think there's a few players. You aware of the background of this? I found it quite.
I was, and I've forgotten. So remind our listeners.
Yeah, I found it interesting just because normally, the golfers have investment banks and maybe even crypto firms, etc., but not really, kind of a crossover promotion. And essentially, his dad was, I think, the head pro at Sleepy Hollow Golf Club, which is where the MLB commissioner Rob Manfred is a member, and the families have been friends for some time. And when Cam Young turned professional, the MLB commissioner took the family out for dinner and basically just said to him there and then, would you be interested? We'd love to put our logo on your shirt. Would you be interested? And it's stuck since then, really. So apparently MLB, I've got a few deals with different players, but he's certainly the kind of most well-known player. I found that quite an interesting kind of crossover promotion. I guess you're both swinging hard at a ball, so it works.
It looks very cool.
Yeah.
I must say, I wasn't going to mention this, given you mentioned what players were wearing. Like Li Haotong, who is a favourite of mine, good Chinese golfer, wore all white at the day that he was suffering from a stomach upset. So he is the bravest man in the field. He had a bit of a collapse in the back nine, but anyway, we'll probably leave that one there. Yeah, interesting. I mean, you'd reference this in the story, actually. It has been widely covered by the golf press about some of the criticisms CBS got for their coverage. We were watching the international feed, I suppose, so we got a flavour of it, but certainly on the 18th, they were panned for missing where the approach shots from McIlroy and Young landed, and then McIlroy's putt, you couldn't actually see the hole. So yeah, but the big topic was actually gnomes. I don't know if you guys heard about the Masters gnomes.
I did not. Do tell.
Oh, it sounds scary.
So it's basically a stunning marketing trick that they keep saying they don't know when they're going to come back or if they're going to come back, so to create some jeopardy over whether you buy them. They've been released in kind of small batches. The press are allowed to buy one. There was one held back for each of them, I think. That they cost $60. It's caused a bit of chaos in the course because Brian Harman got confused for one at one point. And Bob McIntyre got into trouble because he flipped the bird after hitting a bad shot at the 15th and then created a gnome version of this and tweeted it, which didn't go down particularly well, I don't think. But it sold for a 2016 gnome this week. So that's when they started. So it's a very rare gnome, bought for $30. Do you know how much it was sold for at auction this week?
$2,500.
I'm going to say $4,000.
$29,000. So
has it got a green jacket?
They differ year to year. This one had an upside down Masters brolly and a little coffee cup, not even a green jacket. So there we go. Anyway, enough gnomery, John and Maria. Let's dive into one of the big stories of the newsroom week, actually, the Gold Cup. And I know that will immediately make people think of Cheltenham in the UK, maybe, but actually CONCACAF's flagship national teams competition. It has a new broadcaster in Mexico who've won it 10 times. On the face of it, not much of a story. Actually, pretty significant for that rights market and elsewhere. John, maybe you could tell us some more.
Yeah, I think this is super interesting. As you say, it's not the biggest tournament. Well, it's a big tournament in Mexico. I think there was a recent survey done on sports fans in Mexico, and I think 65% of them had football as their number one. I'm not quite sure what the others were picking. Yeah, Netflix buying exclusive rights to the next two editions of the CONCACAF Gold Cup, as you say, the national teams tournament, and also the Nations League finals. This new, Uefa started it, didn't they? And it's kind of been moved around into CONCACAF as well, a nations team tournament. So this will start 27 and cover the 2029 editions as well. Now, the interesting move here is that it's putting the national team behind a paywall. It's not the most expensive paywall. I think the current pricing for a standard Netflix plan in Mexico is around equivalent of $15. So, that's still in parts of Mexico, that's going to prove too much for many people. It's a free, fresh story. The controversy, I don't think, has kind of quite come through yet. Speaking to people last night in kind of the US who do a lot of business in the Mexican sports market, and a couple of LATAM folk as well, this came completely out of left field. This was not expected at all that Netflix would come in and get this property. If you look at the last Gold Cup last year, 2025, Mexico won it, as they traditionally do, beat the US 2-1. That game drew around almost 20 million viewers on Televisa Univision. So it's across their free-to-air platforms and their streaming service. So this has been a free-to-air property because of the importance of the national team. And Netflix has come in and, we assume, put down a very large check to CONCACAF and taken it off free to view. And I think this is going to be very controversial, firstly, but also what else is Netflix going to be looking to pick up in Mexico? It doesn't tend to just, well, it will just dip in and out. We've talked about their kind of strategy before. And I think, actually, Maria, going back to the story that you wrote, I think in November, you did a really very good deep dive on Sport Business Media we'll put the link of that in the podcast description, about Netflix's essentially their strategy on football.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a similar thing to what you just said in Mexico. There were traditional broadcasters who were bidding for the Women's World Cup rights in the US. Fox was bidding, CBS expressed interest, NBC also expressed interest for Spanish language rights, and all of them got completely blown out of the water by Netflix's bid. It was so much more than A, FIFA was expecting, and B, any of the other traditional broadcasters bid. And, when it comes down to it, how can any of the linear broadcasters compete with that, right? How on earth are they going to be able to come up with that much money for, let's be honest, that's not the biggest sports property. That's not a priority for most broadcasters, the Women's World Cup.
What was the motivation from Netflix point of view? I mean, yes, tapping into the growth of women's sports in North America for sure, but it was more than that, wasn't it?
So far, it seems like Netflix's strategy with sport is kind of smaller things, a game here or there, the NFL Christmas Day games, MLB, they have opening nights, the home run derby, things like that. They want to kind of dip their toes in. They want to see how it plays. They want to see if it brings them any subscribers, any churn. They want people to be talking about them. They want people to say, oh, look at what Netflix is doing in sport. I think that's pretty big motivation. But ultimately, they want to own a moment of the sports calendar. And I talked about this before as well for the Women's World Cup. In terms of production capabilities, they don't have to commit to a ton of resources to produce an entire season of content. They don't have to produce tens of games every week for, for example, the NWSL, if you're using the US kind of women's football analogy. The Women's World Cup happens every 4 years. They have the 2027 and 2031 tournaments as well. And, it's a lot easier, but it's also a moment. It's a big thing culturally in terms of women's sports, in terms of US sports. It's a massive thing. And so I think for them, it's a chance to not only see how this would fare, but also kind of experiment a little bit and figure out the quirks in production, the quirks in the live feed. We've seen they've had some issues with their live sports feeds in the past. And this is all part of ironing that out as well.
And yeah, I mean, the arrival of Netflix on the sports rights scene will not be welcomed by all and isn't being welcomed by all in the US, in Canada, and in Mexico. I mean, we don't have time to go super deep in all the regulation being maybe proposed or talked about in the different markets. But you could tell, even by the press release from Netflix saying that there was not going to be any additional costs. That is always the PR line for, we know that this is going to be a bit controversial. John, you maybe talk a little bit about that debate that's going on in Mexico for some over-the-air networks versus OTT subscriptions. And maybe we'll clip in some audio from Catherine so that we have Televisa Univision pronounced even better than I did.
Yeah, well, without Catherine here, we could butcher the Spanish language. But yeah, there are headlines this morning in Mexican press. Adios a la TV abierta. Goodbye to open TV. Lovely, that was beautiful. She'll be messaging in. Yeah, I mean, this deal has come 2 weeks after there was a call from a politician in Mexico for there to be some kind of listed events legislation, which I think we've covered in previous pods, and it's kind of well versed in, certainly in the UK and Australia. But yeah, the point of this particular politician was the concern of foreign streamers essentially coming in and buying exclusive rights to events of national importance, and this would certainly fall under that category. Now, it may well be that Netflix come in and buy this and then sub-license some of the rights. I'd be surprised, as you say, in that statement of theirs saying no additional cost. I mean, obviously, you still need the Netflix subscription. This was only a couple of weeks ago. It came, and part of the politician's comments was backed up by some stats that said, I think 30% of homes in Mexico only are streaming content. So it's not as if it's got, that this is a huge kind of market for the likes of Netflix and Amazon at the moment. I'm assuming Netflix have done this because they see that there is the demand for their services. So I think that, as you said, it's still early doors, but, Televisa and TV Azteca are the two dominant commercial broadcasters. They hold rights to the World Cup this summer. They show Mexico's matches and have done for some time. They have a deal with the Mexican FA, which is coming towards the end of a sales process at the moment that Team Marketing are running, or Team, I think it is now. The latest information we have is that Netflix aren't going to be involved in that. As Maria said, they don't really want season-long rights. That's not what they're about. They want big-ticket stuff. That has started with a boxing event or a one-off golf event or something like that. It's now developed into a month-long tournament, as the Women's World Cup will be, as the Gold Cup will be. The comments coming out of the co-founders of Netflix is that is their sports strategy. It's big ticket stuff. It's own a moment, as Maria says. Let me tune in every Tuesday for 10 months to watch a football match or a tennis game, whatever it will be. So I think perhaps this is literally just them dipping their toe in for a big tournament. But I think when it comes to major tournaments, that's going to be an issue. That it is in Mexico, they've called it. I was on the pod a couple of weeks ago from a trip in Canada where very similar concerns were raised because of the Netflix deal that is in Canada for the Women's World Cup, because Amazon have a large package of NHL rights. It's in the last year of that. Who knows what's going to happen? Rogers are going to have to sub-license it to someone because they paid so much for it. The concern in Canada, again, the broadcasters are thinking that they haven't gone as far as calls for the government, but they are, considering putting together some kind of plea for enhanced listed events legislation in Canada. So I think we're starting to see real concern from traditional broadcasters that these streamers, they've got empty pockets, deep pockets, should I say, and everyone else has got empty pockets. So that is the concern. And in the US, I think we're seeing the same in the US.
Well, exactly.
Right?
I mean, that's why it's a significant story, in that where Netflix goes next is always of interest as to tracking them. But then also this huge debate that is taking place across the whole of North America, of which Mexico is part, and also specifically in the US. Maria, that's certainly a live argument right now.
Yeah, and I was in the US last year meeting with some executives and stakeholders in the industry, and a few people told me, I brought up the Netflix deal for the Women's World Cup, and they all kind of said that Netflix, and I guess the other streamers as well, are not looking to recoup their costs on these rights in the same way as a lot of the traditional broadcasters. They're not looking at the same numbers, really, the same maths as a lot of the other broadcasters are when they're looking at whether or not to bid or how much to bid for specific rights. They have completely different calculations because they're more looking at it as an investment and as a way to test things out, as opposed to, how would we get the most bang for our buck or the most kind of business from this? So that also makes it really hard for other broadcasters to contend with that.
It's a different ROI, right? And it's very difficult for traditional broadcasters, especially in a world of kind of tough advertising models and churn on cable. And when they're writing the checks, it's just a totally different conversation they're having. So, I mean, maybe legislation is the only thing that is going to kind of prevent this from happening. But I think this is why this story really kind of appealed to us this week, because it is, it's a big, big football market that is going to be disrupted potentially by Netflix coming in.
Just as a final point on the Women's World Cup, I asked Martin this the other day and he got it as soon as I asked him. So John, now this is for you. You have until the end of the podcast to figure out your answer. 5 countries have won the Women's World Cup, the FIFA Women's World Cup. 3 are US, Germany, and Spain. Who are the other 2?
Okay, so I've got until the end of the pod. All right, we'll make it a long. We'll make it a long pod, so I've got longer. But okay, thank you, Maria.
Good luck.
Thank you, Martin. I've been off, obviously, so I've left you having to do. Every time I have a week off, there's so much news, it's ridiculous. I want to have a quick whip around of your stories of the last few days, because there's plenty going on, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to claim all the stories myself, but yeah, it's been one of the busiest weeks of the year, actually, or before you got back. And since you got back, Ben has published a big exclusive on Alibaba being in exclusive negotiations to become a Champions League sponsor in the technology and wider categories. So certainly check that one out. In the notes, big news from IMG this week that Barney Francis is moving roles from his executive vice president of studios, heading up all their production business, is going to become chief business officer. So move for him. They've actually, in a slightly unusual move, they've said that they've shortlisted certain people for chief client and operations officer. Not unusual that they would shortlist them, but unusual that they would announce it at this stage before they actually have the person in place. So we just don't know who that is yet. We can maybe get working on that one. And also Chris Guinness, Executive Vice President, Global Head of Commercial Rights, is leaving. He's been at IMG for 30 years. So no, John, you're itching to make a last orders joke or some such, but we can't go there.
Okay.
Then Tour de France, maybe news to close off a very sorry chapter of German TV not fully embracing the Tour de France for a long time. ARD did come back, but ZDF is now coming back after 16 years. 2011 was the last time ZDF showed Tour de France because of their stance they took, and ARD at the time, on doping scandals. So 16 years. 1 year less than a crow holds a grudge. Crows apparently hold a grudge for 17 years, ZDF 16 years. So there you go. And I mean, there's various other stories we could pick, but Matchroom, just because we got hold of their finances this week, unbelievable run of consistent profits that this Matchroom makes. They have also announced a new vertical, John, in terms of player representation.
Yeah, Henry Pollock, the England rugby star or star in the making, has joined Matchroom, which I thought was, there's a picture with him with Eddie Hearn, which I thought, what's this about? Is he suddenly he's big enough to become a boxer. But no, yeah, they've kind of gone into the athlete kind of promotion stuff. They've got a UFC fighter in Tom Aspinall, and it's very much a new vertical for them. I mean, that's what Matchroom do, right? They started off with Barry kind of promoting Steve Davis,
Steve
didn't
Davis,
they?
yeah, absolutely.
And then that went down. Obviously, they've done it through boxers, but they've always done it through a vertical of a sport that they are also promoting. This is totally different for them. This is
moving to rugby,
yeah, and I think just they can see the brands that they can align him with, and that's what rugby needs, right? More than anything, it needs big stars for young kids to kind of look up to, and that's going to drive the commercial picture. So yeah, interesting to see who else they sign up. But yeah, he's the first on board.
I mean, if they could teach him to take the ball successfully into contact, then Ireland would have won the Six Nations. Anyway, that's another story. But yeah, on their numbers, just impressive again. So these are the 2024-25 figures. Professional Darts Corporation, of which that made a profit of 16.1 million, up from 13.5. And we just again see that disparity between the profits of darts and snooker. World Snooker Limited profits are 1.3 million, up from 810,000. And then Matchroom Boxing Corporation was 9.9 million, down from 11.4. That's often quite cyclical, though. The boxing events are where they're hosted, etc. A couple of million profit for Matchroom Multisport and Matchroom Media divisions. But the one other interesting thing was a nod, maybe, to I know that we talked about Barry Hearn saying that, they'd chase money around the world with snooker previously, certainly in doing so, and we spoke about it previously, taking events to Riyadh. That started to, I think, filter through into their accounts. The revenues by region, UK obviously remains the biggest, 21.1 million. This is for World Snooker Limited, but Asia and Middle East has gone up from 7.4 to 15.3. So you can see the direction of travel there. Anyway, thank you, Maria, for joining. John will be back shortly. And from Matchroom in the newsroom to MLB in the engine room after the break, as we analyse the MLB's new sponsorship with Ford.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
We're now joined by Matthew Williams, reporter for Sport Business Sponsorship, for our Inside the Deal section, where we dive into a interesting deal analysis story of the week. Matthew, Major League Baseball and car. Now, this hasn't been a story written for 20 years, a new car deal. Before your secondary school years, probably. What's happened here? Tell us the story.
Yeah, Chevrolet started in 2005 in the category and held it for 20 years. And yeah, that was 2 years before I started secondary school, 2005. So Chevrolet had a big run at it, 20 years. That deal came to an end. They didn't renew beyond the end of the 2025 MLB season. And now, we've had another American automotive manufacturing powerhouse come in, and Ford. It's a 5-year deal, so a lengthy commitment, and we understand it's a uplift in terms of value as well. Full details on that can be found in Sport Business Sponsorship.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that story on the pod, and well worth going to for the details of it financially. But also, can you talk a little bit about how this is going to be activated? Because there's a key date in the diary, right? The whole deal seems to be
it's
important.
certainly central to the activation of the deal. And it's a key date in the American calendar as well, 4th of July, Independence Day. Now, MLB have spotted an opportunity around this with a lot of the other major sports. Their seasons, obviously don't go through the summer. So they've spotted an opportunity to kind of take ownership of that date and that weekend of celebrations in the US, in the same way that the NFL has done with Thanksgiving, increasingly the NBA with Christmas Day as well. That put sort of flagship games on Christmas Day. And I think the MLB are looking to do something similar. Yeah, flagship games. There's going to be 15 games across the weekend this year. And also go heavy on sponsorship activations, and that's where Ford comes in. They're going to take presenting sponsorship of the weekend as a whole, and as they try and though Ford are going to work with MLB and try and craft it into a new tentpole moment for the MLB calendar. They've already got several, like the Home Run Derby, Field of Dreams events, to name just a couple. They've spotted an opportunity to, combine a sort of moment of American celebration with creating a new sort of moment for MLB and its sponsors to activate around.
And it's not just, obviously you've got the 30 Major League Baseball teams that this is important for, but, I've spent a lot of time in very random places in the US where there is no major league team, and minor leagues are huge, college sports minor league teams. This is also kind of an important part of the deal, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Ford's local dealerships are the real beneficiaries of that minor league and also little league activation that's included in this sponsorship. So yeah, Ford has 2,800 dealerships across the US. So obviously lots of scope there to get those local dealers involved, and that can be anything from hosting people at games and, getting their local communities involved in Little League and supporting that. And it's obviously a sort of window into the community for these local dealers, which is, key to the way Ford's business runs with those 2,800 dealers in the US. So I think ultimately that, whilst, we talked before about the 4th of July element being really central, I think Ford would also say, and Michael Cope from Ford, who I spoke to for the key deal referenced earlier, he was really sort of at pains to say that the minor league and little league element really is important because of the dealership network. And the local dealers are interesting as well, in the sense that from what Michael Cope said, they've received a lot of interest from local dealers since the league level deal was announced around the idea of adding to Ford's portfolio of MLB team deals. We see this a lot in US sport, brands complementing central league level deals with smaller team sponsorships. And again, that will allow the local dealers in select markets to kind of leverage both the central deal and a local deal in a way that hopefully provides a more sort of holistic opportunity for them.
Matt, first of all, I'm enjoying the 80s and 90s film references. Field of Dreams, 1989, Independence Day, 1996, maybe slightly before your time, but not dwell on that. This deal just seems very American to me, in a good way, in the sense of swapping one of the big guys for another one. Obviously, that kind of Ford versus General Motors rivalry. It's wrapped up in Independence Day. It's wrapped up in the 250th US birthday. Ford also has a big celebration as well. Yet, at the same time, the MLB in different categories is broadening itself out a bit in terms of where the sponsors are coming from. Japan particularly. How is that sort of shaking out across the various inventory?
It's a fair observation, and it's interesting. Again, I'll refer back to the interview with Michael Cope, who, and I should say, to give him his full title, he's a Senior Director of Consumer Marketing at Ford. He was keen to point out the sort of Americana element of all of this. Like you said, this deal seems very American, and he actually touched on the fact that the US is celebrating its 250th year as a country this year, since the Declaration of Independence. And he actually referenced that as being very important in the timing of the whole thing, and why Ford was so keen to make what is a significant financial commitment and sort of time commitment with the 5-year duration. And in terms of the idea of brands from other countries potentially looking at this deal, we've seen Japan have a huge interest in MLB commercially over recent years, partially influenced by the stardom of the likes of Shohei Ohtani, who plays for the LA Dodgers and is one of the best players in the league, perhaps in the league's history. And, we've seen MLB capitalize on that with several sponsors at the central level, the likes of Konami, Japan Airlines as well. And then the Dodgers themselves have a whole slate of Japan-based brands in their portfolio, recently signed Uniqlo in a field naming rights deal. So you might have suspected to see, obviously Japan, home of some big names in the automotive industry, you might have suspected to see some interest here. But it seems that, I guess, what's won out is Americana and the celebrate, with the 4th of July at the heart of the activation of the deal. That kind of says it all, really, about, I guess there's something, the lineage of Chevrolet into Ford, there's something quite very American about the automotive space, isn't there? And, I think they're quite proud of that. So in that sense, I guess it's no surprise that while they are broadening their international horizons in certain categories, they kind of lean on the sort of national pride element of it all with the likes of a Ford.
Yeah. I mean, you can almost smell the petrol from the SUV filling up at a gas station when you read your feature. It does come through. John, nothing for your Italian espresso machine, though, in the various international sponsorships that you mentioned?
Unfortunately not, no. I mean, I think this is, it's America's sport, isn't it, baseball? So you can't have anything other than kind of an American car leader. What I think super interesting about this story, and it is obviously pinned on the 4th of July, the tentpole events that MLB are now really marketing, and obviously you've done it from the sponsorship point of view, Matthew. We've done it quite a bit from the media rights point of view. The new short-term deals they have, the ones where Netflix, again, we were only talking about them earlier with Maria. The deals they have are opening night game. They have the home run derby and the Field of Dreams game as well. They've got kind of 3 big event games that they're going to each have the exclusive rights to, and it's all about kind of promoting around those tentpole events. I think what they used to be, certainly, they used to be kind of fan engagement things, that all-star game and these kind of events, and they've suddenly become massive commercial drivers. We've looked at the NFL selling huge millions and millions of dollars worth of TV rights fees for these kind of Thanksgiving games. I think it's super interesting that they've kind of gone down this route with Ford on that.
Yeah, that's right, John. And those tentpole events that you reference are becoming increasingly important part of conversations for MLB with prospective sponsors. Not just Ford. I've actually spoken to some other new MLB sponsors recently who said the sort of year-round relevance the league is now able to provide via these events, rather than it just being, all focused on the postseason or whatever. There's kind of a real sort of solid, steady run throughout the calendar. That's actually moved the needle in decisions as to which league to sponsor. MLB is kind of really doing a good job of providing a year-round holistic opportunity.
Matthew, thank you very much for your insights on a fascinating deal, and our listeners should go and read and get the deep dive numbers. We'll be right back with any other business and looking ahead to a week of sport.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
John, let's delve into some of the events coming up and some of the various bits and pieces we've picked up. What are you specifically looking forward to on your sports viewing calendar?
Well, this weekend, World Snooker Championships start. We did a big piece, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago on the Crucible, keeping the contract for...
Did you watch the qualifiers out of interest? I just caught a bit of it, and I was taken aback at how much using LED now. It's gone from what I remember the World Snooker Champs, with just a kind of static advertising board. I don't think this will be the same at the World Champs themselves, but the qualifiers, I mean, you can't move for logos now with lots of LEDs at the back of the room. So keep an eye out to see if there's more introduced in the World Champs themselves.
I haven't watched the qualifiers. There's a 15-year-old in the qualifiers, and he's got, I mean, he might be out by the time, unfortunately, this podcast is in your ears. But yeah, 15-year-old Michał Subasic, I think he's Polish, and he needs 2 more wins to make the first round, which would be incredible, really. I actually played snooker last weekend, Martin, for the first time in a long time. What a difficult sport that is. I don't think there's a contrast between the sport that looks so straightforward on television and is so difficult to play. The table was massive. I think I got a highest break of about 9. So not great. So I'm looking forward to that from a sporting point of view. But actually, just looking a bit further ahead, I think there's potentially something quite interesting happening in Belgian football, the most interesting thing in Belgium. Now, we've written last year there was a decision by the clubs to scrap the end of season format, essentially. So increase the size of the league from 16 to 18 teams and get rid of the playoffs at the end of the season, which was quite controversial because obviously it would start from 26-27, which is the second year of the new TV deal with DAZN, which is, we've written at length, has faced enough problems. But now there's actually potentially a legal challenge to a scrapping of the format, if you like, which is Ghent are considering taking legal action to reverse the playoff decision. There's been some talk of a case at the Belgian Competition Authority and a commercial court as well. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. It's obviously proven quite controversial. It's supposed to, as I say, come in from the new season with smaller leagues. So obviously they're going to have to move pretty quickly if any legal court process is to happen, but we'll kind of have an impact on the television deal there, which is still undecided, would you say, Martin?
I would. It sounds like it's one for Brussels to decide, but that might be a conflict of interest. There's an RCDM Brussels, I think, team. I don't mean, I'm not referring to Anderlecht.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's definitely one for the Brussels courts, but yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. I think if it's going to happen, the court case is going to happen very soon because we're coming to the end of season already. So yeah, perhaps the playoffs will not be scrapped, and there'll be the confusing end of season in Belgian football if you follow European football leagues may well continue.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Good nod to
No
the
worries.
snooker. I was actually played myself a few weeks ago with a friend who's colourblind. And
Wow.
he nailed a green and then thought it was a red, which was quite entertaining.
That famous commentary, isn't there? If you're watching in black and white,
Exactly.
the pinks next to the black
And
or something.
my dogs actually can't. Sandy, my dog, struggles with the snooker because she can't make out greens and reds. Very confusing if you're a dog. I wanted to mention, just to pick up a pull on a thread we talked about earlier on Matchroom. So the launch of, essentially Matchroom Talent Agency, which is commercializing sports stars outside of combat sports, really. The press release for this got us thinking. It was wonderful. You brought it to my attention. There's a typo in it, which we are not immune to typos, or maybe not give any examples, but the typo on the press release maybe gives a hint at the future stars that are going to be joining. So it says that Eddie Hearn believes Henry Pollock has a bright future ahead and expects him to become a household name, and promised more bog name signings that will join the rugby ace and UFC. It's Tom Aspinall in the new stable. So I was going to kick you off with very obscure Jody Mudd, which you have to be a big golf fan to know who he was. But I believe you upped me with yours, John.
I did, and actually, if Matthew Williams was here, he's a massive cricket fan, so he would have gone for Mitchell Marsh, I reckon, the Australian cricketer.
I preferred yours.
Well, my head, like yours, is stuck in 90s football, Martin, so I've gone for Mike Marsh, which I thought was, ex-Liverpool and Coventry, I think, in his time.
So Mike Marsh is going to be in it, and also Pete Sampras.
Well, I didn't even think of that one.
Yeah.
Well, there's Alex Bogdanovic
Quite
as well.
Alex Bogdanovic will be there. Potentially Sterling Moss, although that could be quite tricky. But yes, we would maybe ask you to send in, who would you like to see join the bog name signings in Matchroom's Talent Agency? Please answer us on our postcard or in the comments.
We go. And also, to finish this week's podcast, I've got a quiz to answer, haven't I?
You do? How have you done?
I think, well, Japan is definitely one of them.
Correct.
So there was 5: USA, Germany, Spain, Japan.
You now need to go 90s.
Well, I'm going Nordics, but
Oh, yes.
It's Sweden or Norway, and
it is one of the two.
I'm gonna go Norway.
Correct. Well done.
Oh, there we are.
Maria will be proud. Right, John, enough grabbing at puns for obscure sports stars. Thank you to Maria for joining us. Thank you to Matt. And we will be seeing you next week. And as always, for the most accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, and no shortage of news exclusives as well, please head to sportbusiness.com, and we will catch you all next week. See you later.